Just as a programming note, we did a Twitter survey and you selected Sachs as the person you wanted to moderate the pod most next. So welcome to Fox News Sunday. And here's your host, David Sachs.
You're really chafed about this, aren't you, J. Cal?
No, I am excited for it. I am so excited.
Just to save a keyboard warrior the time, I will never, ever, ever moderate this thing. So I'm here to talk.
All right, 3, 2. Welcome to the All In Pod. I am your host, the Rain Man, David Sachs. The famous doomsday clock that atomic scientists use to measure the threat of nuclear annihilation has never been closer to midnight, not even during the Cold War. But since the besties think it's more important to discuss their stock portfolios, we're going to save Ukraine for later in the show. Priorities, right, gentlemen? And why not? Who says you can't take it with you? The dictator, Chamath Palihapitiya, is claimed to be entombed with his money like an Egyptian pharaoh. And with his sweaters, too, even though it certainly won't be cold where he's going. And of course, he'll throw in the world's greatest moderator, Jason Calacanis, in the tune to be his servant in the afterlife. It's the role J. Cal's been preparing for all his life by sucking up to every tech founder and VC he can get in a room with. I give better odds to the Sultan of Science, David Friedberg. He's just paranoid enough to survive with me in the bunker, even though he still won't be questioning the Davos elites that got us here.
How much did that intro cost? Does it come with the money back refund?
You guys are laughing. You guys are laughing.
I'm laughing. I don't know. I'm laughing.
Yeah. Not with you or at you?
It's good. The funniest part was when you almost read aloud, like it's like you were like, and then David Friedberg, insert pause here.
just reading the notes.
It's an intro. It's an intro.
I'm so glad we do an unscripted show. Okay, go ahead.
Oof.
Friedberg, I remember when you did the intro.
Come on. Did I read?
Actually, didn't we cut it? Yeah, you read and then you cut it. You hated it and then we made you put it back in or something like that.
All I have to say, Chamath, is job security is here. All right. Well done.
Okay. Issue 1.
Issue 1.
Google breakup. The Justice Department and 8 states are now seeking to break up Google's business, brokering digital advertising across the internet. This is one of the most important legal challenges the company's ever faced. Filed a lawsuit on Tuesday. The Justice Department did, alleging that Google abuses its role as one of the largest broker suppliers and online auctioneers of ads placed on websites and mobile applications. The filing promises a protracted court battle with huge implications for the digital advertising industry. Of course, Google responded to the lawsuit in a blog post saying that the DOJ's request for it to unwind 2 previous acquisitions from a decade ago is an attempt to rewrite history. They said the DOJ mischaracterizes how its advertising products work. They say that people choose to use Google because they're effective. And the company highlights other companies making moves in the advertising industry as well, such as Microsoft, Amazon, Apple, and TikTok. So I guess I'll kick it to you, Chamath. Do you think the DOJ has a case here? Do you believe that Google has a monopoly in online advertising and is unfairly using it to gain market share? And is this the right remedy, breaking up the company?
Yeah, I think that this is a totally ill-founded lawsuit. And I think it just shows more of the personal enmity and anger that some people in the US government has towards entrepreneurs and entrepreneurship than anything else. Now, why is that? Let's just think about what a monopoly is. A monopoly or a monopolist effectively creates a completely stagnant, non-vibrant market in which they have pricing power and complete control. Now, the argument that I think that refutes that just on its face is if you actually look, number one, at their share, and number two, how the rest of the share has changed over time. So Nick, can you just please throw that up from Bloomberg? This is just in a Bloomberg article that I just shared with you guys. But Google controls 26.5% of a market. 43.4% of that market is with a diverse group of others. Meta has 18.4% and Amazon has 11.7%. This is not the type of pie chart you would see if you had a monopolist. So for example, if you went back to the big monopolist case in the 1980s, which is when we broke up Ma Bell, well, what that circle would have shown is that they basically had effectively 100% share. And what this shows is that there's a huge diversity of people in this market. The second thing is that if you had done this chart many years ago, Amazon would not have really even been there. And over the last 5 years, they represent almost 12% of the entire market. And it means that if you forecast it forward, they could be at 15 to 20% in a few years as well. So while the pie is growing, and definitely Google takes a lot of the profit dollars, the distribution is so much more than what anything looks like in a monopoly. And so I just think it means that the DOJ is more focused on trying to punish these great American companies than it is in trying to be logical and reasoned. And so I don't think this is going to work. The last thing I'll say about this is that if you think about what you should have done, if I were the US government, I would have actually focused on search, because search is a monopoly for Google. And while Google would try to argue that there are other ways of acquiring information, that is really not true. And if you could prove that that monopoly then led to pricing power in ads, I think that's a much more nuanced but logical argument that could work. But by focusing on this, I think it's going to get deconstructed. It's going to fail. The Texas version of this exact lawsuit already was thrown out of federal court. So I think that judges and the legal system don't have a lot of patience for this thing. It's just meant more to kind of scare American companies and try to play boogeyman and decision maker, and I don't think it's going to work.
Freeberg, let me go to you. I think, Chamath raises a really great point that if you define the market as digital advertising, that, Google's market share is only about a quarter. That doesn't seem like a monopoly. However, what the government says is that you shouldn't look at digital advertising as a whole, but rather this sort of brokered advertising that, Google does for third-party websites and applications. Let me show a chart from their lawsuit. You can see here that the way they define it, again, they see it as this brokering of sell-side inventory, which are website publishers, and then buy-side demand, which are advertisers. Defined this way, it looks like Google has 90% or more market share on the sell side because of the DoubleClick acquisition. They've got somewhere between 40 and 80% market share on the demand side with the advertisers. And then in the middle, they have over 50% market share of the ad exchange. Is this the right way to look at Google's business, or should we be just thinking about it in terms of the overall digital advertising market?
I've been involved in ad networks since about 2002. So it's been, obviously, I'm not directly involved in the business anymore, but I was pretty close to this, and I was pretty close to DoubleClick and the acquisition, and I was a business product manager for a period of time on AdWords. So the way that chart kind of shows the connection between advertisers and publishers is correct, that an ad network, generally speaking, brings buyers of ad inventory to the sellers of ad inventory. And the sellers of ad inventory have the option to sell their inventory on an ad network. And if the money that they're making on those ad slots that they have, whether it's a slot on the side of a page or the top of a page or an interstitial video ad, whatever it is, they're going to keep selling their inventory through that network if they're getting paid the most. And the real reason Google has won is two-part. One is because they ran their ad network as an auction, meaning advertisers were competing with each other to pay the most for an ad spot that was the highest quality. There's also an ad quality index calculation, a click-through index, a bounce-back index. So there's all this data that feeds into Google's ad network auction so that the ad that's shown on the publisher site is not just the best ad for the publisher, but the best ad for the consumer. And then when the consumer clicks on the ad, the publisher gets paid. And the second thing that Google did, and so the auction dynamic is a really powerful dynamic. It creates the best price for the publisher, and it creates the highest quality ad for the user, which translates typically into higher click-throughs and better revenue. What they also did that was really powerful is they did the highest revenue share in the market. So historically, ad networks had I think initially like a 60-40 rev share where they only paid publishers 40% of the revenue the advertiser paid. Then the network started to move to a 55-45 model, then a 50-50 model, then a 45-55 model. I believe on average, Google currently is paying somewhere between 70 and 80% to their publishers. I got to check my math on that or whatever the latest earnings report is.
60s. Yeah.
So, but call it 70. And so it is a very competitive share. Now, the point being, because it's an auction system and because it's opt-in by the publisher, if they're not paying the highest price, the publisher can go and get ads from somewhere else. And historically, publishers built their own sales force to sell ads and to source advertisers and to make money off of their ad inventory. And it turns out it was a lot more effective to use an ad network to do that. The other ad networks simply haven't been as good at building an auction model and building competitiveness. But I will tell you that when you get to a certain volume, and it's not a big volume, you don't need 1 million advertisers bidding against each other. You only need a few dozen advertisers. And once you have a few dozen advertisers bidding against each other, you start to get very competitive in inventory. So Google's real lock-in with publishers, and the real reason they win in this marketplace, is because they pay the publishers the most. And if you try and break this up, and if you actually do try and get into the weeds of this whole system and change it, the publishers ultimately will make less money. And this will be a real problem on the publisher side, that they're making the most money, they're getting the highest share of advertiser spend, and consumers are getting the best quality experience. That's what makes Google's model so hard to tackle from an antitrust perspective, because it's giving...
So basically, is what you're saying that because fundamentally this is an auction model, it prevents Google from extracting monopoly rents?
Correct. And they already pay the highest share on their ad network back to the publishers. And so you could go in and say, hey, high 60s or 70%, they should be paying 90%. What's the real right number if they're already paying more than anyone else to the publishers? They're already making a lower margin than anyone. And I'll say, let me just add 2 more things, sorry, which I think are just...
Well, can I go to JCal first? I just want to get JCal in here, even though he wouldn't do the same for me.
Yeah.
JCal, do you agree with Freeberg that the reason for Google's success is that they're hyper efficient and this auction mechanism prevents monopoly behavior?
No, there is monopoly behavior going on at Google, obviously, with search and putting their own content and services up top. And to Shamat's point, like that's probably the easier target. Here, this just feels like they are maybe 10 years behind. They should have just blocked the DoubleClick, acquisition in 2008 and this consolidation of power. What publishers would say, to Friedberg's point, is when you're selling your own advertising, you get a much higher CPM when you go direct to Samsung or IBM or Disney. And so you want to create those direct relationships. How much do those direct relationships cost? It's probably 20 or 30%, which is exactly to the percentage that Google is taking off the top. So Google's pretty aware of that. But it's just paradoxical that they're doing this at this time, David, because Amazon has developed a huge ad business. Netflix and Disney now have ad tiers for their services to go up against YouTube. So, and then for the first time, we're even talking about Google search supremacy being challenged by ChatGPT. So, much like what happened with Microsoft, they're just late, 10 years too late, maybe.
Right. So, to use one of your favorite words, is the DOJ acting as a rug puller here for Google in the sense that they're trying to unwind 10-year-old acquisitions? Does that make sense?
Yeah, it doesn't make much sense to me.
Should the government be able to unwind acquisitions that happened a decade ago? Does that make any sense?
No, of course not. If they have that, they should learn from it and not do it again. Yeah.
Zax, what do you think?
I think it's a pretty bad way to approach things because it creates so much uncertainty in the marketplace and has a chilling effect on future acquisitions.
Yeah.
Like when you get approval from the government, you want to know you're good.
Yeah.
And we have an approval process. So it seems to me, I agree with JCal, like if the government is going to have a problem with an acquisition, state it up front, but then once they approve it, you're approved, you're done. Yeah. Otherwise, companies will be much less likely to engage in acquisitions. And that's going to have a chilling effect on M&A behavior in the ecosystem, which is bad for the ecosystem as a whole.
Well, what it really does
we need these exits.
It puts U.S. competitiveness against every other country and any other regulatory regime that'll be more permissive to this stuff. And
totally agree.
That doesn't make any sense. And I think this is what's lost on this. I just feel these lawsuits right now are bordering on the mean-spirited because these things have been tried. They've generally failed. And so the real solution, it always goes back to this, and it's ugly and messy, is you need to rewrite the actual laws to reflect how business conditions exist today. And so it's not the responsibility of the DOJ to try to fit a round peg into a square hole. It doesn't work like that. And that's what they're trying to do. They're trying to manipulate and contort the law to try to go after somebody that shouldn't, frankly, be gone after, because these deals, to your point, were done a decade ago, and they were done legally, and they were done rightly. So if you have an issue with how the market has evolved, change the law.
Right. I'll also add, I totally agree with Chamath. I think that this action, as one of our friends put it on our text stream, it's like killing the golden goose. I mean, this is one of the big job creators, innovators, and taxpayers and employers and drivers of economic growth. And why would we allow that to go and kind of burgeon offshore as a government? This is absolutely going to become kind of an opening for some international competitor to come in and try and provide alternative services with similar economics. I'll also say, I just sent you guys a link. I'll send you one more. The market itself is becoming so much more challenging to operate in as an ad network. E-commerce, so Amazon's ad business is booming, right? As Chamath pointed out earlier. But so much more of consumer behavior is shifting where people are going direct to e-commerce sites. And then the ads that are getting the highest click-through and where advertisers are spending more and more money is on e-commerce sites. I know this from experience on a couple of boards I'm at where companies stopped spending on Facebook and Google and just started spending exclusively on Amazon. And that's where you get consumers that are much more likely to purchase. The purchasing proclivity is higher. The click-through rate is higher. So the return on ad spend is much higher. And then I think that there's a big shift happening right now, as you guys know, with third-party cookies. Google has declared that they're removing third-party cookies in 2024. This means that in 2024, it is going to be very hard to track a user from one website to the next. If you go to a website and look at furniture and then you go to another website, third-party cookies allow an advertiser to find you on that other website knowing that you were just looking at furniture and send you a furniture ad and say, hey, come on over, and you're more likely to click on that ad. It's been very effective for advertising, and particularly in the segment of advertising called retargeting, but it is becoming much harder to do this with third-party cookies and with the Apple identifier being yanked. And Google just made an attempt to try and get this change with the W3C that was rejected, and that change is now going to make this hit very, very hard beginning in 2024. So the ad networks themselves are already being massively hurt by Apple's ID changes, the third-party cookies being removed. It's becoming harder to target consumers, harder to make money as for publishers. So meanwhile, the market's being challenged. Amazon's coming in.
This is the inverse definition of a monopoly. When you have a market where there is dynamism, where companies are changing the rules, and that is reallocating share gains to different players, that's the definition of a dynamic market that's self-regulating.
Totally.
5 years ago, this would have made more sense. Yeah.
Much more sense. So I think just this goes back down to one basic thing, which is, do our elected and appointed officials really understand what's going on in the economy? And I think this is an example that highlights not as much as they should. And before a lawsuit like this gets filed, they should call us up. If they called 30 of us into a room one by one and said, can you please explain how this works? You would have come to a different conclusion because we could have articulated these things and it would have been clearer. And so why do they not do that? Or if they do it, who's actually in there? Either way, whatever's getting to the conclusion of let's go file this lawsuit in 2023 is late at a minimum and misguided at best, You
have to ask the question, like, how is this different than Xi Jinping saying, you know what, Jack Ma is too powerful, therefore he's going to learn to paint? Now, I think this is like our government
totally
saying
different.
Google, it is totally different. But,
totally different. Other than that, it's the same.
Well,
totally
but I think that this lawsuit makes no sense.
You always have to bring it back to China. Does everything in your brain have to virtue signal?
No,
like it's like
I'm trying to be intellectually interesting conversation.
Jason, we could be
he's
talking.
still manning an intellectually honest position.
Exactly. Let me finish, Chamath. Let me finish before you jump the fence. Very simply, you asked, like, why are they filing something that makes no sense? My position is, I think they want to have an outcome. And their outcome is they want to stick it to big tech because it's too powerful. And then you just said yourself, square peg, round hole. They're trying to find something to get Google on. This is not it.
How does it relate to China?
Well, actually, I kind of agree with JCal here, actually. I'll defend him for a second.
Well, world's second greatest moderator.
Yeah.
Third greatest.
Take China out of it for a second, because that can mean a lot of different things. And so I don't want to get hung up on that, but it does feel to me like the government is lashing out against companies like Google because they're perceived as being too powerful. That's what's going on. Yes. And in fact, I mean, that's Lena Khan's theory, is that we have to stop big tech companies from getting bigger because power. But in this case, it doesn't make any sense because the auction market for advertising is very competitive, and the remedy of unwinding 10-year-old deals doesn't make any sense. So they're just kind of barking up the wrong tree is sort of the idea here. One final thing,
David, there's two other things that they really should be looking at. As these ad networks are losing their market share in the overall digital ad spend, there are two other players. Disney, and Netflix doing these digital ads on their platforms and having ad tiers. And then you may have noticed Uber's doing an ad business now. They did $350 million in the first year of that business, $1 million a day, and they're projected to do $1 billion next year. And those have location information in it because you have your destination.
Yeah.
And so those new networks and new opportunities are emerging.
It's a dynamic space. I just want to say, you guys are making, I think a really important macro point, which is, in a marketplace, it's always easy to hate the winners and claim that their success is unfair if you're not part of it. And I think that just because something's successful in a marketplace doesn't mean it's a monopoly. This whole thing of envy, we've heard from the Berkshire shareholders meeting. I think there was a good conversation around this, but envy really is ultimately the doom of innovation and democracy. It's you see the success, you want to take down the successful, nothing can be too successful or else it has to be destroyed. And then, as we talked about, it's going to go somewhere else.
Well, just play devil's advocate with it on that, Freeberg. It sounds like we all agree that the government has kind of the wrong theory and is barking up the wrong tree here. However, isn't it the case that Apple and Google are too powerful? Maybe not in this advertising auction marketplace, but when it comes to the App Store. I mean, they have an operating system monopoly with iOS and Android, or duopoly.
But I think you're bringing up the key point, which is these nuances are the ones that matter. There is a body of law today, David, that you can apply pretty intelligently and thoughtfully to that exact problem and also to Google search. And so it's a bit of a head scratcher why the DOJ hasn't spent the time to figure out, to even understand that that's actually where they should be focused, because that is where there is truly, in the App Store case, it's a duopoly. So it's very clear. The share shift has already been set. There is no share shift happening to a third player. There is no side loading that's really happening. And so domestically in the United States and Western Europe, there's a de facto duopoly, complete control, completely inflexible, inelastic pricing. That is a monopoly. And then separately for search in the United States, it is also an effective monopoly. And those are the things where if you really wanted to go after them because you think there's some damage being done to people, I would have focused there. But the ad business has nothing to do with any of this and just means that they don't understand how the market works.